and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, in its latest show of defiance, the DPRK fires 3 ballistic missiles into the sea, days after South Korea announced officially the location to deploy the THAAD. Is there hope for peace on the Korean Peninsula? And the smartphone game app Pokemon Go becomes the most popular mobile game of all time, breaking records in just a week and a half after its launch. What's behind the viral craze? And we begin today's show with the latest deployment of the development of the Korean Peninsula. On Tuesday, the DPRK launched the 3 ballistic missiles into the sea off its east coast. The test came after South Korea and the United States announced the deployment of a new missile defense system known as THAAD, which Seoul says will provide protection for up to 2/3 of the South Korean population and for nuclear power plants. With the rising tensions, the security of the Korean Peninsula is becoming a big concern for all neighboring countries.
Stirring up tensions in the peninsula. 3 ballistic missiles fired at a distance far enough to strike anywhere in South Korea, and only counts for once in a series of ballistic missiles in recent months. South Korea called it a security threat and a provocation.
The DPRK not only conducted its nuclear test but also has been continuously launching ballistic missiles this year, which was a rare phenomenon in the past. The threat to our national security has grown very quickly in a short period of time.
The United States urged the DPRK to stop isolating itself.
North Korea is isolated like never before. The international community is united like never before. Hopefully that will lead to a situation where North Korea makes a strategic decision to come out of the shadows of the international community and try to rejoin the international community. But before we can do that, they're going to have to make a clear commitment to ending these kinds of provocations.
Some say the launch was an objection to South Korea's THAAD anti-missile system deployment, announced last week. Washington and Seoul have disclosed the location of the deployment and insisted it was only meant for defense against a DPRK threat. Beijing and Moscow both oppose the THAAD system. Both governments have repeatedly voiced serious concerns over the deployment, as it far exceeds the Korean Peninsula's defense needs.
To be very honest with you, it doesn't require experts to know this. Ordinary people will know that the deployment of the THAAD system is not just to defend the ROK. It has a wider agenda, and it may even serve the possibility of targeting China.
Pyongyang's continual nuclear tests and missile launches have intensified tensions on the Korean Peninsula, and the system may just be adding fuel to the fire. But, unfortunately for now, no one seems willing to take a step back just yet.
For more discussion on the THAAD system and the recent reactions coming from DPRK, we are joined in the Beijing studio by Mr. Yang Xiyu, Senior Fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. Meanwhile, joining us from Seoul, we are having Mr. Lee Tai-hwan, who is the Director of the Center for China Studies at the So-Young Institute. And joining us from Washington, D.C., we have Ms. Bobina Huang, who is a visiting professor at Georgetown University. She also served as Senior Special Advisor to the U.S. State Department. Welcome to the 3 of you. First of all, I would like to have the reaction coming from you, Mr. Lee. DPRK launched 3 ballistic missiles days after South Korea and the United States announced together the official location for the possible deployment of THAAD in Seongju. What do you make of it?
Because it's not only the North Korean launching missiles is not just a response to the South Korean decisions to deploy THAAD, because the North Korea kept launching missiles in the past, and also I think it's also the decision to deploy the THAAD is to strengthen the defense capability against the missile threat.
Well, Mr. Huang,
threat from North Korea.
Okay, Mr. Lee, may I just follow up by asking you, Yes, you could say whatever their intentions are, and yet the DPRK claimed the launch of the 3 ballistic missiles are a reaction to the location of THAAD. And meanwhile, some are worried about a vicious cycle between the DPRK and South Korea in further deployment and also counter-reaction, which will further complicate the situation, of course, to an already very chaotic situation in the Korean Peninsula. What do you think about that possibility?
Well, I think it's still, this is just a part of the multi-layer defense system. I think with the deployment of THAAD system, we can deter the North Korean missile threat. So we could heighten the capability to deter that kind of missile launch or missile threat. So I think the North Korean response, it is not just a reaction to our decision to deploy the THAAD system. I think they will, regardless of our decision, they will keep launching missiles, they keep tested nuclear tests or whatever.
Okay, Ms. Huang, does that provide the DPRK with one more excuse to launch more missiles? And can we take away that excuse?
Well, I think Dr. Lee is exactly right, and I agree with him. I think we do have to look at these recent missile launches within the context of the broader pattern that Kim Jong-un, under his leadership, has steadily developed and is developing his missile and nuclear weapons programs. Now, on the other hand, I do think, though, that these most recent tests were a message partially to the divided South Korean public, because there are some that are sympathetic to the North Korean position in South Korea, and it's an attempt to further divide the South Koreans and also those who oppose the THAAD for political reasons domestically in South Korea.
As we all know, whatever the Pyongyang say would not necessarily count when it comes to South Koreans' national defense policy decision. But what is important here is what our people inside South Korea have been saying. We cannot reach a conclusion as to all people that are talking about this are being influenced by the DPRK position. So, Mr. Yang, may I ask you about this? We have noticed over the past few days some of the opposition parties' members have already spoken out in South Korea about the danger, as they see it, of THAAD. And meanwhile, the Prime Minister of South Korea, when he was going to Seongji to explain to the public about the deployment, he was hit by water bottles and eggs. We have all seen that photos. It's quite messy. So what do you make of this internal pressure on South Korean government for their eventual decision making at the end of the day?
Well, the decision about THAAD by the South Korean government really deepened the division among South Korean peoples by various reasons, not only because of the political reason, but also reasons in security concerns. Simply saying, in the whole course, the North and the South has fallen the security interaction, but in negative direction. This is the latest round. Say South Korea make a THAAD, and then North Korea make a ballistic missile test. Maybe South Korea will do something more, and so does the North Korea. So in the long run, in the general calculation, none of the Koreas are winner in the negative security competition.
But the issue is, what if South Korea didn't do that? What if South Korea didn't deploy THAAD system? Would that really help South Korea's security? I think that is the argument also very strongly coming from Seoul as well, Mr. Yang.
Okay. Technically, in my personal view, South Korea used to consider importing Israelis' Iron Dome system to protect Seoul and other key areas from long-range rocket, even missile attack from the north. But suddenly they give up this plan and go to the THAAD. On the surface, the THAAD is the game between the north and the south, but unfortunately in nature, it's a game between the United States, China and the U.S. and Russia.
It is no secret, Mr. Yang, that China is not necessarily happy with the South Korean and the U.S. decision. So let me go back to you, Ms. Huang, to ask you further about that. There has been enormous debate, both inside South Korea and outside, even here in China, about what exactly is the purpose of deploying THAAD in South Korea for the United States. Is it for South Korean security and the U.S. military base there security only? Or is it part of a much bigger strategic plan of the United States to have a global missile defense system which would target at whatever enemies as it sees it?
Well, you know, the whole point is that the United States for the last 70 years, since the end of World War II, has acted as the stabilizer in the East Asia region through its system of alliances. And this latest deployment of THAAD is absolutely part of this strategic plan, long-term strategic plan, of creating greater integration to protect the United States and its allies and its interests. THAAD is not actually targeted at anybody, but it is there to protect South Korea and its allies. The reality is THAAD actually will not do much to protect South Korea from North Korea's biggest threat, which has actually always been conventional artilleries. So, as Dr. Lee mentioned earlier, I think he's absolutely right. This has to be part of an integrated defense strategy by South Korea.
All right. To you, Mr. Lee, there has been arguments coming from, let's just take an example. The Justice Party lawmaker Kim Yong-dae, he had a debate with your defense minister in which he talked about the potential argument from him and many of those who oppose the THAAD system to be deployed in South Korea, the possibility of U.S. strategic goals. Here's what he said. He's citing 2015 Missile Defense Report published by the U.S. Congress Government Accountability Office, or GAO, and also the 2017 government budget data suggesting that the U.S. is having a much bigger plan, and South Korea, this time, deploying THAAD system has become part of that U.S. plan. Mr. Lee, what do you make of this? Have you studied some of these documents?
Not really, because this is quite a recent development, I think also. But the basic idea is this. To me, this could be part of the bigger plan, but the South Korea's position is quite clear. We have to do something about the North Korean nuclear and missile threat, because they keep provoking South Korea by launching missiles and also going to conduct the nuclear test, another test. So if we do nothing, we feel very, unsecure, because the deployment of the nuclear weapons, it could be a reality in a few years. So regardless of the U.S. plan, the South Korea needs to do something. Also, the deployment of the THAAD system in the U.S. forces stationed in South Korea is also the right of the U.S. forces. They can do it if they needed to.
I see. Mr. Lee has been Mr. Lee has been emphasizing on the point that the South Korea really needs to do, because it is their security that we are talking about here. But yeah, Mr. Yang, help us to understand this. Is it really going to help? So from your perspective, of course you're having a Chinese perspective. So when we do a decision, we do two lists, pros and cons. Whether pros outweighs the cons or cons outweighs the pros. So on the pro side, taking security of South Korea into consideration. On the con side though, here's the balance. How much would that security be? The THAAD system for South Korea, as Ms. Huang also mentioned, the artillery, conventional artillery system has not been taken into consideration by this specific system. Having said that though, and also, what about big countries like China, like the United States, like Russia? putting on the shoulders of South Korea. It seemed that that country could be caught in the middle. So what do you make of all of these pros and cons for Seoul from your perspective?
Okay, in short, simply, frankly speaking, South Korea has been adopted by the American strategy. So integration of the missile systems in this region, just like the U.S. has done in the Europe. U.S. trying to set up anti-missile systems in East Asia, and THAAD will be one of the part of that. For South Korean government, the THAAD decision this time may be a one-step decision or single step, but for the United States, that is one of the steps for the total plan, for the whole plan. So that is the nature, that's the key concern by China, maybe by Russia either.
Ms. Huang, here is the issue. The issue here is you've been arguing about technical possibilities. For example, the U.S. wants the reporters to go to Guam now to take a look at the THAAD system deployed over there to make sure that people would feel safe for the people in Seongju. And yet, many of those is not looking at the technical details. They're looking at this with very strategic angles, rather. So, Ms. Huang, what do you make of the difference between these two? What would that mean eventually, Ms. Huang, for the final decision?
Well, I think we have to separate out several things. First of all, most of these protests in Seongju in South Korea, it's not actually, they're not opposed to the strategic decision of establishing a THAAD system. They simply just don't want it in their neighborhood because it's disruptive. So this is a classic NIMBY problem, not in my backyard problem. They would be opposed to having a nuclear power plant, most likely, or some other facility. So that's one issue. Secondly, I think it's actually rather simple. This is part of South Korea's attempt to increase its defenses against growing insecurity based on North Korean actions. And I think it's actually false to say that somehow this is provoking negative and therefore greater provocations by North Korea or even China or Russia. This is simply one of the only ways in which South Korea can try to increase its defense.
Well, Ms. Huang, the South Koreans would explain for their own positions, but what about for the United States from your perspective? What exactly is the plan for the United States? Can you make sure to help us understand this? This is not part of the strategic overall plan, and there's not going to be second step, third step, 25 years or 20 years from now.
Well, you know, somehow you seem to be implying that there is this grand conspiracy by the United States.
I'm not implying, I'm just quoting others about the suspicion. I'm not implying anything. That's why I'm asking you, Ms. Huang.
I understand, but this is a common view. Number one, I think one of the weaknesses of U.S. strategy, frankly, is that we, the United States, is just not that long-term in its strategic view, certainly compared to China, and I think this is really. But having said that, I think it is actually part of U.S. global. The U.S. is a global power, and the U.S. does think globally. So missile defense has been part of U.S. global defense strategy, not just under this administration, Obama, but frankly for the since President Reagan. So this has been going back several decades. There's nothing sinister or you know, conspiratorial about this. I think it's actually pretty clear.
I think there's nothing conspiratorial we are talking about here, but rather strategic goals that each country have for their own national interests. That's what we're talking about here. Take a look at this. What the DPRK missile, yes, thank you. Take a look at this. What the DPRK missiles can do, because we talk about the security for South Korea, it is very eligible for us to take a look at this. According to a think tank, the George C. Marshall Institute, the DPRK has 4 types of missiles. Nodong, whose range is around 1,300 kilometers, covering entire Korean peninsula, a large part of Japan, and also a large part of China. Taepodong 1, ranging around 2,000 kilometers, reaching far east beyond Japan, half of China, a small part of Russia. Musudong, ranging about 4,000 kilometers, reaching deep into the Pacific and covering almost the entire China and the 2/3 of Russia. The last one is Taepodong 2. These names are very important, ranging around 8,000 kilometers, covering Eurasia continent to the west and reaching Alaska to the east. These are the capability at this moment of DPRK, and of course Mr. Lee has been coming from South Korea arguing about the security for South Korea. Mr. Lee, let's put aside the debate. Yes. Let's just focus on now what South Korea can do with your president likely to leave the office quite soon. And before she leaves, she wants to make sure this could happen, the THAAD system. Yet, very strong oppositions inside the country, at least for the moment. What do you think will happen? What kind of process do you think your country has to go through in order to make a final decision now?
Well, excuse me. The process is to take a time. I think it's by the end, the deployment of the THAAD could be done by the end of next year, I think. So it is a kind of a political process, but still, even though we have some kind of opinion divide on this issue, but still, I think if we can make it, because the decision to deploy the THAAD system is especially in the U.S. forces stationed in South Korea. Actually, they have a right to defend their own military forces, and also we need to cooperate as an ally of the United States. Also, so to defend the national interest of South Korea, the President Park could make a final decision. So I think it's anyway we can do it.
All right, Mr. Yang.
Without any yeah.
Okay, Mr. Yang. Before we go, final words from you. From now until the time now South Korea plans to deploy the THAAD system, there's still quite some time. Almost everybody could assured that during this period of time, more things are likely to happen. So what would that mean for China? China has been an important part of six-party talks. Now, nobody knows when that could begin. We see more interactions in a negative way on the Korean Peninsula. We have also seen more debates between China and the United States about what each other's agendas are toward one another. So what do you think China can do over the next few months until what South Korea now claims that the THAAD system will be deployed?
Firstly, let me make it clear. Regarding to six-party talks, regarding to the denuclearization, regarding to the sanction measures based on the series of UNSC resolution, including the latest one, 2070, China will continue our commitment and the current policy. No changes about that.
Is that still important? Is the peace process still important?
Yes, and China remain insisting on the peace and stability and denuclearization. No question about that. No matter what negative impacts from the THAAD. But on the other hand, the THAAD decision and the following deployment will definitely make the atmosphere of China-South Korean relation in worse, and make the China-U.S. relation more complicated. So that's the strategic impacts on the total relationship among the related players.
All right, we're running out of time, unfortunately, for such a very important topic, but I really appreciate all your contributions coming from your own perspective. That makes the debate interesting. Thank you so much. Yang Xiyu in Beijing, Lee Taiwan in Seoul, South Korea, and Bobina Huang in Washington, the United States. Really appreciate the three of you. Thank you. Stay with us here on World Insight. We got our final segment coming right up. Pokemon Go becomes the most popular mobile game of all time, surpassing previous record holder Candy Crush Saga over a week into its launch. What's the big deal? Welcome back. You're watching World Insight on CCTV News. Pokemon Go is the first augmented reality game to go mainstream. It has been nearly 2 weeks since its release in the US, Australia, and New Zealand. The popularity of the game has far exceeded expectations. The number of players have hit over 65 million, and it has more active daily users than Twitter. People across the world are clutching onto their smartphones tightly, catching Pokemons everywhere, from the open road to inside their offices.
The game combines players' mobile phone cameras with GPS tracking in what is called augmented reality. Users walk around real-life neighborhoods to hunt down virtual cartoon characters on their smartphone screens and rack up points.
Whether at the office or a backyard barbecue, inevitably, people are talking about Pokemon Go. Nintendo new app has become an unprecedented gaming phenomenon. It is the most viral app of all time.
It's a fun, easy game that everyone can kind of relate to. People that have never touched Pokemon or even played any of the cards or any of the games are like, all right, this seems kind of cool. I can play this anywhere from my home, and so.
Started playing this 3 days ago. So I went to Little Tokyo and I pretty much went around. It was midnight, so there were over 100 people were just playing Pokemon.
Other factors fueling the viral craze: Pokemon Go leverages a favorite 20-year-old cartoon franchise, giving it an approachable, reassuring quality. And it offers that almost drug-induced continuous gratification as players capture characters and earn points. As a familiar game, Pokemon Go is drawing a broad base of users, both in terms of age and gender, though the numbers do skew some towards young males.
The idea of a location-based game that you can play while you're walking around. So that aspect, and the fact that you can then use your phone's camera to sort of see Pokemon in the real world, that's sort of the cute and slightly surreal aspect of it, right? So you could go outside into Times Square and see a Pokemon sitting on the hood of a taxi. And that's just a fun thing to take a picture of, right, and share on social media, and that's really facilitated the viral spread of the game too.
Pokemon Go and the new world of augmented reality in the gaming raising loads of concern about physical dangers, like distracted users walking into traffic or even going onto private property and getting shot at. And the new app has raised a host of new data privacy issues.
In the meantime, as the first major entrant to this space, Nintendo is watching its shares skyrocket, nearly 90% since Pokemon Go's debut, giving the company a market value of roughly $17 billion. I'm Jeannie Yerman for CCTV.
For more on the Pokemania, I'm joined here in the Beijing studio, Andy Mok, founder of Red Pagoda Resources. In New York, we're having Mr. Ari Zodan, CEO and founder of Quantum Networks, and that is a New York-based e-commerce company. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., we're having Jeff Joseph, Senior Vice President of Communications and Strategic Relationships, Consumer Technology Association. Welcome, gentlemen, for the three of you.
Great to be here.
Who have played
Welcome.
Pokemon Go?
I've played it.
Okay. There we go, Andy.
I've played as well. I'm
Jeff. And what about you, Ari?
I'm a fan.
I'm also a fan, although I'm not an addict yet. But I totally get the
It's early.
application, and I think
It
that
is early.
it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
it
okay.
makes a lot of sense on a whole bunch of different levels.
We could be fans of this computer game, but let's be fair when it comes to today's discussion. So let me ask you about this. What does that mean for Nintendo? I mean, after years of silence on the market, eventually come up with such a strong product. Is this really going to be the beginning of another era of Nintendo and another era of computer games?
Well, Nintendo has struggled with their console, and this is enormously successful for them. It's driven the stock price up an additional $7 billion. Yeah. What I think it's indicative of, though, is really the value of intellectual property, because an important component of what made Pokemon Go successful is the Pokemon franchise. And without that, just having the infrastructure, the technological ability to offer augmented reality games, as we've seen from earlier ones, haven't really broken through.
Mr. Zoden, do you think this would mean rearranging of the powers in the computer game industry?
I mean, I think so. I don't know if it's realigning or reinvigorating, but certainly it's a perfect storm in a good way. We have the emergence of location-based services that people are getting more familiar with. We have easy access to broadband, and we have the industry, what the industry is calling gamification. So we're going to start seeing a lot of money poured into this industry. And quite frankly, I think it's going to benefit small to medium-sized businesses, and then big retailers are going to jump on the bandwagon as well.
Right. Mr. Joseph, though, money is not the issue here. I mean, we've got a lot of cash around the world ready to be burned. Of course, when there is such a void, everybody wants to jump on it. And yet the question is this going to be a promising road for the industries and also for consumers to pursue? I think that is the question. Is this going to be a trendsetter for the future, or this is just going to be a temporary phenomenon?
Well, that's a great question, and there are many parts to that. So there's first, is the game going to have legs? And that's only time will tell. When we think about Nintendo, this is not some startup. This is a company that led in the gaming space for many years. Certainly they've had their troubles over several years, but they've created just legendary characters. I think a lot of this plays on nostalgia. I don't think consumers are thinking about IP, but they're certainly thinking about nostalgia from the game. So they had some advantages going into this. But I think the really exciting story here is that what this portends for the future of augmented and virtual reality, and also about location-based gaming and the possibilities that come about this. For many consumers, this is their first time experiencing any form of AR. We at the Consumer Technology Association has forecast that we're going to sell about 1.2 million virtual reality gaming headsets this year alone. Revenues are going to climb year over year. So we're very excited about what this means for the long term of gaming, long term of augmented reality, and introducing that to consumers.
Is this going to be the revolution when it comes to computer games using VR technology? Mr. Zoden.
No, I mean, I don't think it's. I don't think we're talking about I don't think we're talking about a complete game changer. I think we're talking about a natural evolution in technology. And what's great about the tech sector and gaming, and we talked about AR and VR, we're going to be seeing a lot of companies that are going to be wrapping themselves around this kind of technology too, which I think is great for the overall economy, also specifically as it relates to the tech sector. So I'm very bullish on gamification. I'm bullish in creating jobs and building out the tech sector, and I think that this is just, again, this is a natural evolution to something I think really great.
Natural evolution or a revolution?
Well, I think that there isn't a bright line distinction, but I think there is a big difference between virtual reality and augmented reality, and Pokemon Go, I think, really is making mainstream augmented reality. Right. What I think is very interesting, though, is that it's not just in the gaming sector that this will have an impact, because if we look at Niantic, which is the company that was spun out of Google that created Pokemon Go, Gilman Louie, who is the former head of the CIA's InQtech VC fund, is a director of that company as well. And I think that is an important, thing to think about, that there's going to be much broader applications to AR than just entertainment.
But when you think about it, there are so many that are jumping on the technologies, thinking about the applications. Where would they be? And what will be the trendsetter for the future? This, of course, is an interesting example, yet people are debating about how long this would last. I mean, Pokemon Go, when it comes to a trend, how much technology would improve on top of this? And on the other hand, how much would this mean vis-a-vis the other areas which we have been focusing so much on, for example, social media, such as Twitter? Now the users of this has already exceeding Twitter for a daily account. So, Mr. Joseph, what do you make of these two questions, and how will the two questions, in fact, and its answers interact with one another?
Well, if I could do that precisely, I'd put my money down and be a millionaire.
I know.
But I do think that but there are some interesting trends here. And again, I would differentiate the game itself and what it means for the company from the technology. And I think the really exciting piece is in the technology. And we're already seeing some retail outlets, some brick and mortar outlets that are using what are called lures, part of the game where you lure the Pokemon in to bring customers into their storefront. Could that be a new opportunity for brick and mortar stores to compete with online stores? Only time will tell. The applications around AR are fascinating. Imagine being in medical school and using AR to practice your surgical skills someday. Or architects are able to use AR to, in real time, sort of visualize what that world may look like. So again, I think the revolution that you keep referring to is more in the use of the technology and even in location-based gaming. Time will tell. Teens are fickle. I have 2 teenage girls. They love the game, but tomorrow they may be onto something else. Only time will tell. But again, the technology is what's really exciting here. And I think it's right. There could be global economic repercussions built around this technology.
Only time will tell, and probably time will be very soon to tell. That is the issue these days. Having said that, though, the other side of this computer game we haven't studied yet is the social impact. We have been hearing about the violation of privacy. We have been hearing about some of the criminal issues that might be related to playing the games. So, Mr. Zoldan, from the very beginning, when technologies are being applied, there have been the question about its social impacts. Have technology companies and also application companies done enough on those fronts? Who will make sure things will happen on a parallel basis, protecting rights of consumers and also the use of technology, application of technologies? Mr. Zoldan.
That's a good question. I mean, it's a very good question, and I think the answer is somewhat multifaceted. But with the evolution of technology, you know, especially with the experts on the panel over here, the issues of privacy and data collection and security always comes up, and that is a major concern. But in the overall ecosystem, you know, obviously there's a lot more positive than there is more negatives. But I will say, in terms of, you know, whose responsibility is it in terms of the infrastructure, the security infrastructure, the data privacy, I think at the end of the day it really does fall on the individual just to be fully aware of what they're doing, of what they're engaging in, and it's sort of a buyer beware scenario, and that's been since the beginning of time. Having said that, I don't believe in government intervention on any level, and that there are standards that are going to be evolving and that are going to emerge that's going to protect the consumer but also encourage the industry. And I think the combination of that will create a positive influence.
But what about you, Mr. Joseph? You are coming from Consumer Technology Association. Probably one of your responsibilities is to protect the rights of the consumers. So when the industry are all agreeing with everything, what about from you?
Well, we actually represent manufacturers. We represent about 2,000 companies across the consumer technology space. But I would agree that as long as companies and manufacturers are transparent about how they're using that data, what our research shows is that consumers, and what experience shows, is that consumers are willing to provide that data. They're willing to give up some modicum of privacy as long as they get some benefit out of it, and as long as they're relatively aware of how that's being used. And I think that's the key. You know, we're still in the very, very early days of this new world in which we live, in which we're allowing companies to have access to some of our personal data. And those rules are still being worked out. But what we've seen time and time again is that if there's a benefit, if I know that if I give information that I'm going to have a better shopping experience, that I'm going to have an experience that's more tailored to my likes and wants and wishes, then I'm willing to give up some level of privacy and security.
All right. Well, if they are all for the industry, Mr. Mark, you have to say something for the consumers. Otherwise, I have to say something for the consumers.
Sure.
Okay, Mr. Mark.
Well, you know, I think, you know, data privacy, of course, is one important issue. The other is liability, because if someone's playing the game, they get lured somewhere, they get robbed, or they get into an accident. Who's responsible for that? Now, in the U.S., as we know, it's a very litigious society. And, you know, sooner or later, there will be a lawsuit, maybe even a class action lawsuit in terms of trying to hold Nintendo, Niantic, or Google
But the question is how big a price consumers have to pay before that happens.
Yeah.
So that is the issue here.
I think that's true.
All right. Well, it seems that we don't have an answer for that. Mr. Joseph?
Just let's be fair that certainly companies have a responsibility to inform and educate consumers, but you can't help legislate, you can't regulate, you can't help being silly. As we use these games, we have to be cognizant. We have to be aware. Consumers have to be aware if they're walking someone's private property. They have to be aware if they're encroaching on that or walking in the middle of traffic or things. So there's a level of personal responsibility that goes along with all this as well. And again, we're still at the very early stages, and a lot of this will develop over time.
All right.
A lot of the rules and regulations.
You know what? It's actually very interesting. We spoke about the early stages. I think what people aren't talking about is that this is a great proof of concept and a great case study to what the future is going to look like for AR, VR, and gamification. And I think that there's a lot to come, and I think the industry is very excited about it.
That is why we are talking about it. This is going to be a very interesting case study. Everybody love it, but eventually, what does it mean for all of us? But thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. Andy Mock, Ari Zoldan, and also Jeff Joseph. Thank you. Really appreciate it. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of our program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You will be able to find us, or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.